So how do you prepare a sermon?
Ooh. If I can convey one thing to the next generation, preaching is hard work. It's hard work, and it saddens me that we have I won't say a generation, but we have some preachers who just do not see the hard work that must, I don't say may, must go into preaching if you're going to craft and deliver a sermon that transforms the very lives of people. When I was at Canaan and I knew I was going to preach with some regularity, I used to be able to plan my preaching out. But I always start with scripture, for the most part. I always start with my text. I figure if I can get my text in my head and get my text absorb it into my spirit, then I have some running room. So I live with the text. I live with the text for at least a couple of days because I have to read it and read it and read it, and until I literally feel it. And then I start asking questions of the text, making notes of the text. I'm preaching a sermon now that I've been dissuaded from. When I looked at the text, I immediately wanted to call the sermon "Shut Up and Move On." And I asked a preacher friend about it, and he said, "Now, we wouldn't expect that from Dr. Knight." So I said, well, in my focus group, he was my focus group of one, it didn't land well. So I called the sermon something else. But I kept reading in different translations, and the Message Bible actually says, God will fight for you. You need to just stand still, keep your mouth shut, and move on. Exactly what I want to preach. So the next time I preach that sermon, I'm going to call it "Shut Up and Move On." And I'll just use the Message Bible. But you would never get that just looking at one translation. So I'm more proficient in Hebrew than I am Greek. So I read the Hebrew when I read the Hebrew. When I'm working on a Hebrew Bible passage, I work with the Hebrew. Then for me, the sermon doesn't make sense unless I can connect it to the context. And that's not to say that I sit around and wait for something to happen. But just there's enough in the daily comings and goings of life that you ought to be able to really connect your sermon to the contemporary context. So for me, that's very important. How will this text, this ancient biblical text, resonate with this contemporary context? Now, often, and certainly in these last few years, there's been enough in the headlines to just preach. But Dr. Proctor would always say, you don't want to be sitting around waiting for something to happen when there's enough. Somebody's always got a child that's misbehaving, or a spouse that won't do right, or a bill that can't get paid. How do these biblical texts speak to what people are actually going on? So for me, I want to have a sermon that resonates with where people really are. And then I like to envision the people. I was like, Brother Jones, Sister Smith, will this reach the teenagers? Will this reach the young adults? Will this even impact senior citizens, because you want to be able to preach in such a way that you throw a wide enough net that something you say will reach everybody, will touch everybody. Even if the little kids come up and just say, I like the way you talk, you know. Right. You want to get something out of your congregation. So that's what I do. I ask questions of the biblical text. What does this text say? What does it mean? What did it mean then? What does it mean now? What's going on in the community? What's going on with the politicians? That can be worked in the sermon. What is God up to in this text? What is the theology of the text? What is the theological language of the text? And then I try to apply it to their lives. I don't want them to just be listening to me to be listening to me. I remember asking William Sloane Coffin in my homiletics class at Union, I asked him, I said, when you preach a sermon, what do you expect people to do? And he said that if I preach a sermon about beating swords and the pruning hooks and spears and he said, I expect them to go out and do that. And so, and then, of course, Martin Luther King did the strategy was that, he would preach and then they would march. He would preach and then they would vote. So that is something that is very profound for me. And that can be either prayer, tithing. It doesn't have to be social action, but, you want people to respond to your preaching. They say a thing in the AME church, when you come to the altar rail, kneel in prayer and go out to serve. And so you don't want people to remain the same. You don't want people to remain, you want your sermons to be transformative. And that's what I try to, get people to do. And I have to target for transformation. Because if you don't plan for transformation, it doesn't happen automatically, It doesn't happen automatically. So the sermon has to be crafted and written and delivered in such a way that transformation will occur.